Tonight I want to speak about two things that, at first hearing, may seem unrelated, but which are in fact two faces of the same truth. The first is silence, not the silence of an empty room, but the silence of mind that has, even briefly, stopped its endless commentary on what is and what is not, what might happen and what might not, what you have and what you lack. The second is a particular kind of courage, the courage to act, to imagine, to assume, as if you had nothing to lose. These two are not separate practices. Silence is the condition in which the second becomes possible, and the second, properly understood, is simply what silence looks like when it moves through a life. Let me describe the silence I mean, because the word is easily misunderstood. I do not mean merely the absence of sound. I mean a particular quality of inner stillness, the quieting of the constant, low-level argument that most people carry on with themselves throughout the day. The doubts that arise unbidden, the fears that rehearse themselves without invitation, the endless commentary on circumstances, on what they mean, on what they predict. Picture a lake at dawn, its surface so still that it holds the sky in perfect undistorted reflection. This is the mind in genuine silence. And here is what matters about this image. A disturbed lake does not fail to reflect the sky. It reflects it brokenly, fragmented, scattered into 1,000 pieces by its own agitation. The sky has not changed. The capacity to reflect it clearly has been lost to the disturbance. Your mind works the same way. The creative power operating through you, the imagination that shapes your experience, does not stop working when your mind is agitated. But what it receives, what it is given to work with, becomes fragmented, contradictory, scattered. A mind at war with itself, wanting one thing while believing another, hoping for abundance while assuming lack, sends a broken signal. And a broken signal produces a broken reflection. A life of partial results, of 2 steps forward and 1 step back, of desires that seem to almost manifest and then dissolve. The stillness I am describing is not achieved through force. You cannot command a lake to be calm by shouting at it. That only disturbs it further. Stillness comes through a gentler movement, the willingness to observe your thoughts without immediately reacting to them. To notice a fear arise and simply watch it arise, the way you might watch a cloud cross the sky without either grasping it or pushing it away. Clouds pass. This is their nature. A thought observed without being fought tends, in its own time, to pass as well. As this practice becomes natural, something begins to happen. In the spaces between the thoughts, in the brief moments of genuine quiet, something else becomes audible. Not a literal voice, though it can feel like one. A kind of knowing, a clarity about what you actually desire, beneath the noise of what you have been told to want, what others expect of you, what fear has convinced you to settle for. This deeper knowing is not separate from you, reaching in from outside. It is the deepest layer of your own consciousness, the part of you that has never doubted, never feared, never believed in limitation, because it has never been anything other than the creative power itself, individualized as you. It is from this place, this quiet, clear, undisturbed place, that we are ready to do the second thing. There is an old story that I want to look at freshly tonight, because I believe it has been told so often as a tale of forgiveness that its deeper teaching, a teaching about consciousness, has been lost. A son leaves home, squanders everything he was given, and returns in rags, expecting nothing, prepared to beg for the lowest place in his father's household. And what does the father do? He does not see the rags. He does not see the wasted years, the poor decisions, the diminished man standing at the gate. He runs to meet him. He calls for the finest robe. He calls for a ring. He calls for celebration, not because his son has earned it through some display of contrition, but because the father is responding to something the son's appearance does not show. The father sees the son as he truly is, whole, beloved, never actually diminished in the only sense that matters. This is not a story about a generous father. It is a story about the relationship between consciousness and appearance. What the father did, seeing wholeness where appearance showed brokenness, responding to truth rather than to evidence, is precisely what you are being asked to do with your own desires, not to deny the rags. The son was, in fact, standing there in rags. That part of the story is not denied. But the father's response, his assumption, his felt reality, was not built from the rags. It was built from a deeper knowing about who his son actually was. This is what it means to clothe yourself in the feeling of your wish fulfilled before the outer evidence agrees. Not denial of what is currently visible. A deeper response. One that does not wait for the visible evidence to change before it changes itself. Now I want to address the phrase that may have struck you as strange when you first heard it. Act as if you have nothing to lose. What could this possibly mean when so much of life seems to be precisely about what can be lost? Money, security, relationships, reputation, these feel like things with very real stakes, things that can genuinely be taken from us. But consider what is actually being risked when you choose to assume, genuinely with feeling, the state of your wish fulfilled. You are not risking your money. You are not risking your relationships. You are not risking anything in the physical world at all, because the assumption occurs entirely within consciousness, where no one but you has access, and no one but you can judge. What you are risking, what you stand to lose, if the word loss applies at all, is a self-concept, a particular, familiar, well-worn idea of who you are and what you are entitled to expect from life. The identity of someone for whom this kind of thing does not happen. The comfortable, if painful, certainty of limitation. And here is the question I want you to sit with. Is that really something to be protected? Think of an actor who has played the same role for years. A row of poverty, of being overlooked, of narrowly escaping disaster, of never quite getting what they want. The role has become familiar. The actor knows its lines, its gestures, its emotional registers intimately. There is, strange as it sounds, a kind of comfort in familiarity, even when what is familiar is painful. Now imagine this actor is handed a new script, a different role entirely, someone for whom abundance is natural, for whom love is simply present, for whom the future holds nothing but unfolding good. Would this actor, having spent years mastering the old role, refuse the new one out of loyalty to familiarity? Some would. Most people, in fact, do exactly this. Not consciously, not as a deliberate choice, but through the simple inertia of habit. They have played the role of limitation for so long that even when handed evidence of a different possibility, they return to the familiar lines. To act as if you have nothing to lose is to recognize that the only thing genuinely at stake in taking on the new role is your attachment to the old one. And an attachment to limitation, examined honestly, is not something worth protecting. It is simply the thing you are, finally, after all this time, free to set down. Let me state principle itself with precision, because precision matters here more than eloquence. If you assume that you are what you desire to be, and you continue in that assumption, not for a moment, not for an afternoon, but as a sustained inner state, that assumption will harden into fact. This is not optimism. Optimism is a disposition, a tendency to expect favorable outcomes, often without any particular mechanism behind it. What I am describing is not a disposition but a law, as exact in its operation as the law that governs the growth of a seed into a plant, or the law that turns the food you eat into the cells of your body. You do not believe in these laws in the sense of having faith in something uncertain. You simply observe that they operate consistently, whether or not you understand them. The law of assumption operates with the same consistency. What you assume, genuinely, with feeling, as a settled inner state rather than a fleeting hope, becomes, in time, what you experience. The mechanism is not magic. It is the simple fact that consciousness is the creative substance of experience, and assumption is the form consciousness takes when it is actively shaping what will appear. To act as if you have nothing to lose is to take this law seriously enough to use it deliberately. It is to say, with the calm conviction of someone stating an obvious fact, I am what I desire to be, here now, regardless of what the visible world currently shows. There is another old story I want to bring to your attention because it speaks directly to the most common reason people abandon this practice before it has had time to work. An army marches around a fortified city. They are told that if they persist, if they march day after day, and on the appointed day give a great shout, the walls will fall. Imagine being one of these soldiers. On the first day, you march, you do as instructed, and the walls stand exactly as they stood before. The second day, the same. By the sixth day, nothing visible has changed at all. The walls are as solid, as unmoved, as they were on the first morning. How easy it would be, by the sixth day, to conclude that the instructions were wrong, that this approach does not work, that the walls of this particular city are simply too strong, too established, too real to be affected by marching and shouting. And yet on the seventh day the walls fell. What happened between the sixth day and the seventh? From the outside, nothing. The walls gave no warning, showed no crack, offered no sign that anything had shifted. But something had been happening all along, in a dimension the eye could not access. The persistence itself was the work. Each day of marching was not separate from the falling of the walls. It was the falling of the walls, occurring in a form not yet visible. This is what persistence in assumption actually is. Not optimism that something will eventually happen despite the evidence. The recognition that the evidence, the unchanged walls, the unchanged circumstances, is not a report on whether the inner work is succeeding. It is a report on what has already been built in the past by past assumptions. It says nothing about what is being built now in the invisible by the assumption you are currently holding. Walls that have not yet fallen are not proof that they will not fall. They are simply the seventh day, not yet arrived. I want to give you something specific now, a practice that Neville described and that has, in my experience, a particular gentleness well suited to the most receptive hours of the day. In the moments before sleep, when the body has begun to relax, when the grip of the analytical mind has begun to loosen, when you are approaching but have not yet crossed into sleep itself, choose a short phrase, simple, a few words, a phrase that implies your desire is already fulfilled. Thank you for my perfect health. I am so grateful for this wonderful position. Isn't it wonderful that we are together now? The specific words matter less than what they carry. They should be simple enough to repeat without mental effort, and they should imply, not argue for, not justify, simply imply that what you desire is already so. Repeat this phrase gently, the way you might hum a familiar tune. Not with urgency, not with the strain of trying to convince yourself of something, with the soft, unhurried quality of a lullaby, the kind of repetition that soothes rather than insists. And as you repeat it, let the feeling that belongs to these words arise. The gratitude, the quiet satisfaction, the relief of something settled. Let this feeling deepen as the words continue, until the words themselves become almost unnecessary. Until what remains as sleep approaches is simply the feeling itself, carried with you across the threshold. This is not affirmation in the sense of repeating something you do not believe in hopes of eventually believing it. It is the active occupation of a state, practiced at precisely the hour when the mind is most open, shaped by what occupies it, and least equipped to argue. Done night after night, this practice does something specific. It impresses upon the deep, creative layer of your mind, the layer that does not distinguish between what is vividly felt and what is physically present, the reality of the state you are choosing. And that layer, once impressed, works without rest, without needing your conscious attention, toward the expression of what it has been given. I want to correct a misunderstanding that arises often when people first encounter this teaching. To assume the state of your wish fulfilled is not an instruction to do nothing and wait for circumstances to rearrange themselves around your stillness. The assumption is not a substitute for living. It is the foundation from which living, rightly understood, proceeds. When you genuinely occupy a new state, when the assumption is not merely an exercise you perform for a few minutes and then set aside, but something you are increasingly living from, you will find yourself moved to do things. Not because you have decided, through effort of will, that these things must be done to make your desire happen, because from inside this new state, certain actions simply seem like what a person in this state would naturally do. If you have assumed the state of someone whose work is flourishing, you may find yourself drawn to a conversation you would previously have avoided, or to learning something you would previously have considered unnecessary, or to reaching out to someone you have not spoken to in years. These impulses do not announce themselves as strategies for achieving your goal. They simply feel, in the moment, like the obvious next thing, the way it is obvious, if you are thirsty, to reach for water. This is the action that belongs to acting as if you have nothing to lose. It does not carry the texture of risk because it does not arise from the part of you that calculates risk. It arises from the part of you that has already, in consciousness, arrived and is simply moving naturally in the direction that arrival implies. There is a particular kind of vigilance that undermines this work more than almost anything else, and I want to name it plainly: the habit of checking. You plant the assumption, you feel it genuinely for a moment, perhaps even for several days. And then naturally, you look around. Has anything changed? Is there evidence? Is it working? This checking, however understandable, is itself an assumption. The assumption that the thing is not yet present, that it remains to be verified, that its reality depends on the verification. Every act of checking plants, alongside whatever else you have planted, a small seed of not yet. A seed in the ground does not need to be dug up to confirm that it is growing. The gardener who digs up the seed daily, out of anxiety, to check on its progress, does not speed the growth. They interrupt it, disturbing the very conditions the seed needs to do what it is already quietly doing. Detachment in this context is not indifference to your desire. It is trust in the process, the same trust the gardener has in the seed, which requires no daily inspection because the gardener understands what seeds do. You water, you provide what is needed, and then you allow what you cannot directly control, the actual transformation from seed into plant, from assumption into circumstance, to occur according to its own nature, in its own time. What do you lose by this trust? Only the anxious checking itself, which was never serving the growth, only interrupting it. I want to address directly what happens when, despite genuine effort, the outer world continues to present evidence that contradicts your assumption. Because this will happen, and how you respond to it matters enormously. If you have assumed the state of vibrant health and then experience a period of illness, if you have assumed financial ease and then encounter an unexpected expense, the temptation is to read this as the failure of the practice, as proof that the old reality is more powerful than this new assumption, as a sign to abandon what you have begun. But remember what we said about the lake and about the wake behind a boat. What appears in the outer world is not a report on your current consciousness. It is the visible arrival of something set in motion earlier, sometimes much earlier, by a previous state. The outer world is always, in this sense, somewhat behind. It is showing you where you have been, not where you currently are, and certainly not where you are going. When such evidence appears, there is a response available that is neither denial nor despair. See it as the residue of an old assumption completing its expression, the last visible trace of a state you have already, internally, moved beyond. And rather than letting this residue destabilize your new assumption, use the moment to deepen it. Return with renewed attention to the feeling of the state you are building. Let the old evidence pass through, as the cloud passes through the still sky, without disturbing the water beneath. This is not denial of what is happening. It is the refusal to let what is happening, which belongs to the past, however recently that past occurred, determine what you are now choosing to assume about the future. I want to close with something that I believe contains, in a single phrase, everything we have discussed tonight. You are not separate from the world you experience. The world is not a fixed container in which you, a separate being, happen to find yourself. The world you encounter is, in the most literal sense available to language, yourself, made visible. Your assumptions, your dominant states, your habitual feelings, these are not private interior events with no bearing on anything beyond your own skull. They are the blueprint from which your experienced world is continuously being constructed. This means that when I say be silent and act as if you have nothing to lose, I am not describing two techniques for personal improvement. I am describing the only genuine way to change your world, because your world is you, in the form of circumstance. Silence clears the static, so that what you assume is not contradicted by 100 other competing, half-conscious assumptions running beneath it. And acting as if you have nothing to lose is simply the courage to assume something worth assuming, something that reflects not your history, not your fears, not the role you have been playing out of habit, but the truth of what you actually are. The creative power itself, individualized, capable of nothing less than what it has always been capable of. You have nothing to lose by this, not your security, not your relationships, not anything that matters. You have only the costume to lose, the old, familiar, ill-fitting costume of limitation that you have been wearing so long you forgot it was ever put on. Take it off in the silence, tonight, and put on, instead, the only thing that has ever truly been yours, the feeling, the conviction, the quiet and unshakable knowing of the wish already fulfilled. The walls will fall, perhaps not on the first day, but they will fall. This is not hope. This is law. Good evening. May your silence tonight be deep, and may what you assume in that silence be worthy of what you actually are.